In any thriving democratic society, the right to freedom of speech is often considered one of the most fundamental and cherished freedoms. It allows individuals to express their opinions, engage in debate, and challenge the status quo without fear of reprisal from the state or other powerful entities. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution enshrines this right, stating that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. This powerful protection ensures that citizens can freely discuss ideas, share their beliefs, and participate in the civic life of their nation. The idea of free speech is grounded in the belief that the open exchange of ideas is crucial to the functioning of a democratic society. Through discourse and the airing of opposing viewpoints, we can seek truth, hold our leaders accountable, and shape public opinion. Without this right, individuals would be stifled, unable to engage in the very processes that make democracy work. However, while the value of freedom of speech cannot be overstated, the question arises as to whether there should be limits placed on this freedom, especially when it comes to speech that can be deemed harmful. The concept of hate speech brings into focus the tension between the right to free expression and the protection of individuals from speech that may incite violence, discrimination, or hostility towards specific groups. Hate speech, broadly defined, includes any speech, gesture, conduct, writing, or display that incites violence or prejudicial actions against individuals based on race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or other protected characteristics. This kind of speech, often inflammatory and dehumanizing, has the potential to cause real harm not just in terms of emotional and psychological damage, but also in terms of physical violence, societal division, and the erosion of social cohesion. At the heart of this debate is whether the right to free speech should be absolute, or whether it should be tempered by the need to protect people from harm. Can one person's right to express their views infringe upon another person's right to live in a safe and inclusive society? And if so, to what extent should the law intervene? One of the most compelling arguments in favor of limiting hate speech is the need to protect marginalized groups from discrimination and violence. Throughout history, marginalized communities such as racial minorities, LGBTQ+ individuals, religious minorities, and others have been subjected to harmful stereotypes, dehumanizing rhetoric, and incitements to violence through speech. Hate speech has played a significant role in perpetuating social injustices, from fueling racial hatred and ethnic cleansing to fostering anti-LGBTQ+ violence. When speech leads to or incites harm, either directly or indirectly, it becomes a serious issue for society as a whole. Legal frameworks in various countries, including the U.S., have grappled with how to address this balance between free speech and protecting individuals from harm. The question is not just theoretical. It is about the lives of real people who are affected by the words and actions of others. As society becomes more diverse and interconnected, the consequences of harmful speech are felt more acutely, creating a demand for a legal framework that can effectively address hate speech without infringing upon free speech rights. On the other side of the debate, those who argue that freedom of speech must remain absolute and unrestricted contend that any government intervention in the realm of speech is a slippery slope toward authoritarianism. The core belief here is that censorship, even in the name of protecting people from hate, can be dangerously overreaching. Allowing the government or courts to define what constitutes hate speech opens the door to subjective interpretations that could easily be misused. Who decides what qualifies as hate speech? Who determines the thresholds for harm? If the government can decide to restrict speech that is considered offensive or harmful, the boundaries of permissible expression could be gradually eroded, limiting the ability of individuals to express dissenting opinions. In this view, freedom of speech must be robust and unfettered, not just for the sake of democracy, but to protect the very foundation of a free society, one where citizens have the right to speak their minds, even if their views are controversial or unpopular. The debate over the limits of free speech is a complex and multifaceted issue that has significant implications for how societies function and how individuals interact with one another. The challenge is to strike a delicate balance between protecting individuals from harm while preserving the fundamental freedoms that underpin a democratic society. In the following paragraphs, we will delve deeper into the arguments for and against placing legal boundaries on hate speech and explore how different legal systems around the world approach this issue. Ultimately, the question of where to draw the line between freedom of speech and hate speech is not only a legal issue, it is a moral and ethical one that calls into question the very principles of justice, equality, and human dignity. It is a debate that will continue to evolve as society grapples with the complexities of an increasingly interconnected and polarized world. As the world becomes more interconnected through digital platforms and social media, the impact of hate speech has grown exponentially, affecting not only individuals but also the fabric of entire societies. The argument for regulating hate speech rests primarily on the harm it causes to individuals and groups, particularly those who are already marginalized or vulnerable. Hate speech does not just harm in an abstract or theoretical sense, it has real-world consequences. People who are subjected to hate speech often experience psychological distress, emotional harm, and even physical violence. This is particularly true for communities that already face systemic discrimination, such as racial minorities, religious groups, and the LGBTQ+ community. When hateful rhetoric is left unchecked, it can create an atmosphere where individuals feel unsafe in their own communities, schools, and workplaces. Furthermore, this kind of speech can embolden individuals who hold extremist views, leading them to act on their hatred and perpetrate violence against those they see as their targets. Take, for example, the devastating consequences of hate speech in history, such as during the Nazi regime in Germany. The government used hateful rhetoric to incite violence and justify the dehumanization of Jewish people, ultimately leading to the Holocaust. Similarly, in the United States, hate speech has been used to perpetuate racial segregation, discrimination, and violence against Black Americans, indigenous peoples, and other communities. The harm caused by such speech is not confined to the immediate moment. It reverberates across generations, creating lasting psychological and social damage. The psychological toll of hate speech can manifest in various ways, from depression and anxiety to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Marginalized groups may internalize these negative messages, feeling less valued or worthy in society. This cumulative harm makes it clear that there is a moral imperative to protect individuals from speech that directly incites violence, discrimination, or hatred. On a societal level, hate speech undermines social cohesion and disrupts the sense of community necessary for a healthy, functioning democracy. When hate speech is allowed to flourish, it divides people into us vs. them mentalities, fostering an environment of hostility and intolerance. This erodes the basic trust that is required for a society to function cohesively. As a society, we agree that there are certain behaviors that must be regulated for the greater good, such as laws against defamation, incitement to violence, and fraud. In a similar vein, hate speech that targets groups based on race, religion, or other protected categories should be seen as something that harms the social contract. The state has a responsibility to protect individuals from harm, even if it means placing reasonable limits on speech that may contribute to societal division and the deterioration of public trust. The goal is not to stifle free expression, but to ensure that speech does not cause harm in ways that are destructive to individuals and the collective social order. Furthermore, hate speech regulation is not about stifling debate or discouraging the expression of unpopular views. In fact, the regulation of hate speech can enhance public discourse by creating a safer environment in which ideas can be exchanged freely without the fear of being targeted by hate. It allows marginalized voices to be heard without the risk of being drowned out by hate-driven rhetoric. A society that tolerates hate speech risks silencing the very voices it seeks to protect, reinforcing systemic inequalities. By setting boundaries on speech that leads to harm, society can ensure that free expression remains meaningful for all members of the public, rather than allowing it to be co-opted by those who wish to incite division and violence. Additionally, in modern legal frameworks, hate speech regulations can be carefully crafted to protect freedom of speech while still safeguarding individuals from harm. For example, many European countries have enacted laws that restrict speech inciting violence or discrimination against specific groups, while still allowing for robust public discourse. These laws typically focus on speech that has a direct and demonstrable harm to individuals or society, rather than penalizing mere expression of opinion or dissent. Such nuanced approaches seek to balance the need for public safety with the protection of individual liberties, acknowledging that the right to free speech must be weighed against the potential harms that unrestricted hate speech can cause. On the opposite end of the debate, there are those who argue fervently that any regulation of hate speech undermines the fundamental right to freedom of expression, a right that is the bedrock of democratic society. To them, freedom of speech is not merely a right to express popular or acceptable views, but a protection for all speech, even speech that is offensive, hateful, or controversial. The core principle here is that once the government or the state begins to decide which speech is permissible and which is not, it sets a dangerous precedent for censorship and government overreach. The fear is that, over time, what is considered hate speech could broaden to include more opinions, views, and expressions that are not inherently harmful or inciting violence, but simply unpopular or uncomfortable. From this perspective, the regulation of hate speech can quickly slide into broader censorship that limits the expression of dissenting opinions, particularly in politically charged or controversial areas. For instance, individuals may be penalized for criticizing certain political policies, questioning the status quo, or expressing views that are in the minority. This creates an environment where people are hesitant to speak out for fear of legal repercussions, leading to self-censorship and a chilling effect on free discourse. In a democratic society, it is crucial that individuals are able to engage in open and robust debate, even if the speech they use is offensive or confrontational. The marketplace of ideas must be free from state interference, so that diverse and dissenting views can compete, challenge, and refine one another. Any government that starts regulating speech, even with the best of intentions, risks infringing on the essential democratic function of free expression. Moreover, the regulation of hate speech is fraught with subjectivity. Who determines what speech is harmful and what is not? Different people, communities, and cultures interpret speech in vastly different ways. What one person might consider hate speech, another may view as a legitimate critique or expression of personal opinion. The potential for abuse is enormous, with governments or individuals using the power to regulate speech to target political opponents, minority views, or unpopular causes. For example, governments could target dissenting political opinions as hate speech, silencing criticism under the guise of protecting public safety. The danger of such overreach is particularly evident in authoritarian regimes where hate speech laws have been used to suppress free expression and justify the persecution of opposition groups. Furthermore, it is important to recognize that combating hate speech with legal restrictions may not necessarily achieve the intended goals. Instead of reducing hate or violence, it could merely drive such speech underground, making it harder to address or challenge. People who hold hateful views are not likely to change their beliefs because of government regulation or legal sanctions. They may simply find new channels through which to express their hatred, potentially in more hidden or private spaces. In this way, censorship could unintentionally exacerbate the problem rather than solve it, making it harder to confront and challenge harmful ideologies in the public sphere. Ultimately, the right to free speech is not just about protecting popular or socially accepted ideas, but about safeguarding the space where diverse voices can express themselves without fear of reprisal. A society that values freedom of expression must be willing to tolerate offensive or controversial speech, recognizing that even hate speech can serve as a form of expression that should be protected. The remedy to hate speech is not censorship, but the promotion of counter speech, more speech, not less. In a free society, the best way to combat hatred is through education, dialogue, and the power of diverse, opposing viewpoints, which will over time push back against harmful rhetoric and create a more just and inclusive society. While both sides of this debate present compelling arguments, the central challenge lies in finding a way to strike a balance between preserving the right to free speech and protecting individuals and society from the harms that can arise from hate speech. This balance is particularly important in an age where the lines between public and private discourse have become increasingly blurred, and where the power of social media amplifies both the reach and the potential harm of harmful speech. The goal is not to silence unpopular or controversial opinions, but to ensure that speech does not cross the line into incitement to violence or hatred that undermines the rights and safety of others. One possible solution is to adopt a nuanced approach, as many democratic nations have done, where speech is protected unless it directly incites harm or violence. In this model, the state does not regulate speech simply because it is offensive, but rather because it poses a clear and present danger to public safety or the well-being of individuals or communities. For instance, speech that encourages racial violence, advocates genocide, or promotes discrimination against vulnerable groups could be restricted, while speech that merely offends or challenges accepted norms would remain protected. This approach ensures that the freedom to express unpopular ideas is safeguarded while also addressing speech that has a demonstrable negative impact on society. Additionally, it is important to recognize the role of society itself in combating hate speech. Legal frameworks can only do so much. The broader community must engage in counter-speech, education, and advocacy to counter the harmful effects of hate speech. Promoting media literacy, fostering empathy, and encouraging dialogue across cultural divides are essential tools in creating a more inclusive society. In the end, the most effective solution is not necessarily through government regulation, but through collective action and public discourse that elevates the values of tolerance, respect, and inclusion. Ultimately, the question of where to draw the line between freedom of speech and hate speech is not easily answered, and it is likely to evolve as societal norms change. The challenge lies in ensuring that any legal frameworks put in place are both just and necessary, preserving the integrity of democratic principles while protecting individuals from harm. The debate will continue to be an essential part of public life, and it is one that requires thoughtful consideration and an ongoing commitment to balancing the competing values of freedom and protection.